So good morning, everyone. Really nice to be able to connect in this way. Some of you know we have people in the building here in Minneapolis, so feel free if you're in the neighborhood and you want to sit with other people. We have a big screen TV. I'm here in the office, so I can teach without a mask on. But hopefully, someday in the future, I'll be able to be in the Dharma space in the meditation hall without a mask. But we're going to keep doing this hybrid format where we just want a really good Zoom experience for those of you, for how many reasons, find that the best way to join in the community. But we also want eventually to have a more in-person environment back in the building when that makes sense. So let's just settle in. I pasted once or twice already. I'll do it right now again. And in those Sunday resources in the chat, you'll find the link if you'd like to donate to the center, and also the chant that we do in the morning, Sunday mornings. Recently we've been doing the Effusion with the Divine Abidings chant, sometimes called the Four Quarters chant. So let's do that together. Now let us make the four boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with gladness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So take some time and settle in. Listen to the body, make the adjustments that are needed so that you feel comfortable, relatively upright, feeling at home in this moment, embodied, and this willingness to harmonize with the conditions that are here, the quality of the body, the qualities of the heart and mind. Doesn't mean that the conditions are perfect or the way we want them to be. It just means it is this way now. And that because of that, it makes sense doing our best to harmonize, to soften, to actually be interested, a willingness to open, a willingness to be curious. Often we defend ourselves by having some idea of what it means to meditate, or some idea of who I am now or what's happening to me. But let all of that fall more and more into the background, and let it be replaced with a more honest and simple openness to the conditions that are here. So this harmonizing with the way it is, it's really this fearless submission to the simple, ordinary reality of the moment. And we can begin, because it's more obvious, we can begin with the reality of the sitting body, the breathing body, however that experience is right now. Let's experiment with a generous yes. Sitting, breathing is like this. Feeling the body sitting is like this. Breathing in, experiencing the totality of the body just as it is. While breathing out, learning how to allow the body to be the way it is, not to be in conflict with the body, not to be out of habit resisting or hiding from sensation. And of course, we practice opening and harmonizing and allowing because it's the healing and skillful thing to do. And to be resisting it consciously or unconsciously is stressful. It's really that simple. It never makes sense to consciously be disconnected, to consciously be numb, to choose numbness, to choose denial, to choose control. Those reactions, although it might make sense on some level, when those habits are seen more fully in the present moment, then the heart understands this is not the way. This is not the way to release, to peace, and to any kind of real healing. That way lies in a willingness to open and feel what's here to feel. It lies with a greater and greater humility so that the mind can really open and sense in a more immediate, direct way. Oh yeah, this is the feeling here being felt. This is the experience that's coming and going. And we can begin with what's relatively gross, the experience of the body sitting and breathing, and stabilizing this present moment awareness with what's relatively simple and gross, the body. But it provides a really useful vehicle to begin to open to what's more subtle. And the more we allow the body to be the body, sensations to be sensations, sounds and sights to be sounds and sights, the more we begin to feel the body in this subtle way as a movement, a never-ending movement of energies, vibrations, very similar to the activity of the mind, which is also another natural movement of thought. Often these thoughts and these emotional responses are related to the sounds and sights and sensations that are moving. And altogether, it's one great river, one great movement of sensation and sound and sight and thought and emotion, smells and tastes. These are the rivers, or the river of our life, always in motion. And the only real relevant question is, are we willing to meet our life as it is? Are we still under the delusion that we can't handle the exposure? So then we get caught in the habit of constantly projecting something onto the moment and then defending our idea, our ideas. It's such a relief to put all that down. Feeling the breath coming in, and simply for that duration of breathing in, allowing everything to be the way it is. And then as we feel the breath going out for that duration, practice letting everything be. Letting thoughts be thoughts, letting emotion be emotion, letting sensation be sensation. For just that duration of exhalation or inhalation, we just explore the possibility of being intimate, free of grasping, free of needing to be in control or needing to even define who I am or what I'm doing, not even needing clarity about the practice. Let it be more simple. As you notice the breath coming in, just see if it's possible to be radically open, even if what we're opening to is confusion, the experience of confusion, or the experience of not knowing. Okay, not knowing's like this. You belong too. Perhaps there's nothing that doesn't belong. And this is the exploration right now. So even when really disturbing thoughts about some problem in our life arise, we're not saying that it isn't a problem. We're just saying that in this moment, the heart can understand this thought is arising with this emotion. It feels like this. Perhaps you can belong too. To have the thought, to have the emotion, to feel it as it is, and to let it be, let it come and go. See what happens next. One moment or one half breath at a time. So we'll continue in the next 15 to 20 minutes in silence, just doing the best we can. Remember, we're building confidence in the capacity of the mind, of the heart, to connect and allow. In a way, it's the exploration of this basic question. Is it safe enough to relax? It's just that same question to the nth degree. Is it safe enough to relax? To put down the armor? Is it okay to be wide open and simply allow whatever's moving to move? And these questions aren't that different than the question, can this heart love unconditionally? Can the tenderness and caring of this heart be fearless in the face of suffering, my own and others, the world's suffering? Can this heart be wide open to the joy and the goodness and the beauty that we experience, at least in moments? Not afraid to be happy, not afraid to be appreciative and grateful. It's really important that we take time, ideally every day. We take time to directly and immediately explore the possibility of release or freedom. So is there an unshakable release of the heart that's available now when conditions are like this? What's in the way of being free, being at ease? And can we be open and at ease with whatever seems to be in the way? Can we be free with whatever seems to be in the way of freedom? So for the last 2 minutes or so, just explore the possibility of freedom here and now. And if you don't find that word freedom useful, then maybe for some, exploring the possibility of fearlessness, or exploring the possibility of being wide open, curious, or the possibility of loving unconditionally, saying yes to the moment, to the conditions. Many ways to explore the possibility of freedom that's here and now. And especially this sense that freedom is available even if there's some idea that I don't deserve it, or I haven't done anything to deserve it. Or maybe we can be free and open with that idea rattling around in the heart, or whatever kind of shame or sense of not being good enough there might be. Maybe we don't have to be afraid of those kinds of thoughts. And maybe, just maybe, it's okay to be imperfect, to have an imperfect life, an imperfect body, an imperfect conditioned mind with its particular habits and tendencies. Maybe somehow that's not in the way of release and freedom and a boundless love that can include everything. So take your time. You may need to want to adjust your body, stretch a little. That's fine, that's good. And just again, that sense of community, knowing that we're here together. As you probably, most of you know at least, I spotlight myself because we do record this live on live stream on YouTube. And that way the talks and the guided meditations are always available later if you want to listen to on our YouTube channel. You can just search when you get to YouTube for Common Ground Meditation Center. And most of the talks from Shelley and myself and other visiting folks go right up to our YouTube channel. So take advantage of that. But you can always choose the gallery view. And that's, as most of you know, in the upper right, if you want to see the other folks that are there here with us. So I want to continue the subject that we started earlier in January, this series of talks and discussions, and hopefully you're doing some study on your own around the possibility of freedom. And as you might imagine, it's really, as it often is, useful to begin with a lot of humility, like just to be curious, like what is freedom? And as is also often the case, we know more about the absence of freedom, like what it feels like to be really entangled and caught up, and what it feels like to be oppressed and burdened and unhappy. But that's something, just to know the absence of freedom. Oh, I don't know about freedom, but I know right now this isn't freedom. And we can get clear, like balance the heart, stabilize the awareness, and get clear. Well, what is this experience that I'm calling suffering, this absence of freedom? What is it? And what are the causes? And what happens when the causes, the supporting causes, aren't there? Is that freedom? And you know, the interesting thing when we are caught up in one way, little way, big way, or another, we often don't have enough interest and stability of awareness to keep tracking that experience of personally suffering. Here I am, being a suffering human being. It hurts. I'm angry, I'm upset, I want, I long, I'm lonely. So whatever the particular flavor of the suffering, but with a real interest, a real curiosity and stability of awareness, we track it. We track it, we track it, we track it. We know what it's like this, right? This is one of the real great advantages of having some momentum in our awareness practice is we can track these ordinary human experiences of being a suffering human being. Until we notice something, it's gone. But we're often, wisdom awareness is often not there in that moment when there is suffering, and then it's gone, it ceases. And we know this is the case because otherwise it would be this amazing traffic jam of our personal suffering if it never went away. But it does go away. You know, we have this little vortex of suffering or that little vortex. We've had thousands, tens of thousands of dramas, intense, heavy, difficult, painful spinnings of our heart, body, and mind. But one way or another, they have come to be, and then one way or another, they cease to be. And we often miss that, and there's a lot of learning in seeing how our mind and heart and body gets entangled, and seeing how that entanglement, that oppressive burdensomeness ceases. And I just encourage all of us, we'll continue with this topic of freedom maybe for 1 or 2 more weeks, but just in a very pragmatic way to explore freedom and the absence of freedom in all ways. And like when the heart feels relatively open and loving and friendly, like just notice the freedom of that. And when the mind, heart feels contracted and afraid and angry or whatever contracted state it might be, notice the absence of freedom. But in this balanced, non-judging way. It's not about judging ourselves or thinking that we're somehow fundamentally broken, but just understanding that movement from freedom to oppression, from freedom to being burdened by life. That's a natural movement, and we can learn something about that. And that is I mentioned last week when we were talking about this relational world, the world of relationships. This is the primary learning in that world, that we live in a lawful relational world. So when there's a lot of suffering in our relationships, it's lawful, meaning we can come to understand how this has come to be. When there's this, there's that burdensomeness of the heart, that heaviness of the heart. When there's not this, the heart's not burdened. So what is the this that correlates with suffering in our relationships to our experience, our relationship to others, our relationship to our life, our body, our mind, the quality of the mind in a moment? And we really want to master the lawfulness of karma. So this generally fits under the teachings of karma, which just is a short way of defining that law of karma, is that intentions matter. The quality of our heart, the qualities of our motivations and intentions, they matter because they lay down an impression in the heart, in the mind stream. And then who I am now in this moment, the mind stream that is showing up and relating, participating, that mind stream was conditioned by those past impressions. So if I was relating unskillfully in the past, that relating unskillfully laid an impression down on the heart, on the mind stream. And so this is the mind stream that's now relating, having that impression. So it all of a sudden becomes quite relevant. What sort of seeds are we planting now? Not much we can do about the seeds we planted, the impressions that were laid down in the past, because that's who we are right now. We are, in this kind of normal sense of self, me, who I am, this natural mind stream, the sort of movement of patterns of ways of relating, tendencies, impulsivity, right? This river that we call me, Mark, myself, it's just all these impressions that have been laid down. And so now in this moment, this is the sensitivity that's meeting the conditions of the moment. But it's already in motion. So all we can take responsibility is for the kinds of impressions or seeds that are being planted right now. And that's why last week I mentioned the power, the liberating power of restraint. It's because we might have the impulse to plant some seeds right now because of past tendencies that I can't do anything about, because those tendencies are already alive in my mind stream, like the tendency to be defensive or the tendency to be reactive in whatever ways, we tend to be reactive, different for each of us, being the victim, acting out aggression, whatever the tendency might be. That tendency is real. we have to have a responsible, honest relationship with it, because that's the nature of this conditioned heart, mind. But we can develop, as we talked about, I talked about last week, we can develop this power of restraint, like to sense the unskillfulness of acting out my aggression, acting out my anger, or beating myself up and spinning with ideas of not being good enough and being bad and hating myself. So I can sense the tendency because it's there, it's real, I can be aware of it with wisdom and kindness, and I can refrain from identifying, taking it personally, and I can refrain from acting as if that tendency was me. So the tendency is going to be the tendency. Those past tendencies, or what got set in motion in the past, that, in a sense, is the karma we have to harmonize with. We have to have an honest and hopefully relatively intimate, clear-minded relationship with all the tendencies that get triggered. And we know there, in a sense, are tendencies when we see that, oh, the heart feels like this, the heart wants to react like this, the heart wants to close down like this. We simply have to own these tendencies, not as so much who I am, but what's here now. And because it's here now, we respect them, because they're here and now. And then the question is, what does skillfulness look like when the heart has the tendency to want to hit back? Whether our tendency is to hit ourselves or to strike out and with our words or whatever and cause harm for someone else because we're hurting. What's the skillful way? And this so-called moral truth, I'm saying that in a sense to be provocative, but there is this truth of our moral sensitivity. It's kind of a cumulative truth, a cumulative understanding that comes from letting the past get distilled into real earthy wisdom. And in Buddhism, as some of you know, we call that hiri ottappa. This conscience is probably a useful English translation. Having a conscience means that our past actions, including, maybe even most importantly, all our past mistakes, as well as any past successes we've had in this relational world, it lives in our heart as a kind of earthy wisdom, where we know the sort of cumulative earthy wisdom knows, whoa, I need to be careful here, because in the past I've made a lot of mistakes. I've acted out in ways that have caused me and others a lot of pain. So we have this sort of heightened awareness, this wholesome concern, like, honey, be careful. And this wholesome regret. You remember what happened last time? That pain is still reverberating as a kind of temple, a monument. Don't do that again. That's what we need. We need these roadmaps, these sort of big monuments that say, hey, in the past, when conditions were similar, you did this, the heart acted in this way, and this enormous pain arose, this enormous complication arose. And so this wisdom, this earthy wisdom we call, our conscience, or this wholesome fear, this wholesome regret, it's like this edifice that allows us to refrain from making the same mistakes again. And we really want to honor this. And we feel it, but we mistrust. It's like, oh, I wish I didn't feel this. But actually what we should be saying to ourselves is, I'm so glad I feel this. Because it's like how the past speaks to the present. And this and it's embodied, really. It's often a visceral feeling that goes with whatever clarity, the thought that, oh, don't do this. Or maybe let's just pause for a moment and let the dust settle and see how can I avoid causing problems for myself and others? How can I creatively manage the situation that's presenting itself? How can I not just do what I've done before and get the results I've gotten before? How can we do this differently this time? And then I mentioned last week, this can lead to the bliss of blamelessness, where we get to the place where more and more situations in our life, even difficult, so we're not like avoiding the complexity and the messiness of taking on responsibilities or getting involved or trying to make the world a better place, trying to make our lives better. We're really engaged, but we really trust that the heart has this power. It's really the power that comes from moral sensitivity to pause when we don't know a way to be skillful. So when in doubt, we don't just trust the impulse to say something or to do something. When the conscience, this voice, the Buddha calls it the guardians of the world, the guardians of this relational world, this conscience of hiri-ottappa, moral fear or wholesome fear, moral or wholesome regret, this visceral sense of what's right and wrong, doesn't come from outside of us. It's really the distillation of past experience, the heart reading cause and effect, learning from cause and effect, like what actually works in terms of how I relate, how I respond. What motivations, what intentions can be trusted? What motivations and intentions are not trustworthy? Right? And yeah, we can learn from each other, but mostly we have to learn directly, immediately, from studying cause and effect. And that's like submitting to the law of karma is sort of the beginning of real safety as a human being and real wisdom as a human being. We've become a spiritual being at that point. We're not just limited to being an animal, following instincts and, in a way, trapped by our past conditioning, doing what we've done before, getting the same results over and over, because there's no way, there's no capacity yet, we haven't developed or used the capacity to be reflectively aware, mindfully aware. Oh, when I relate in this way, this is what gets set in motion. More freedom or more complications. Right? So we're reading. And that's what this reflective awareness, this wisdom awareness or mindful awareness provides. It really allows that conscience to really line up with what works and what doesn't work. What ways of relating are skillful. Not skillful theoretically, but actually in terms of what leads to our own well-being and the well-being of others. What leads away from our own well-being and away from the well-being of others. And surprisingly maybe, to find that they're always aligned in the deepest sense. Because sometimes we think, I have to sacrifice your well-being for my well-being. Or I'm going to sacrifice my well-being for your well-being. And that just seems to throw us for a loop. It makes everything complicated, like whose well-being am I going to care about right now? Your well-being or my well-being? As opposed to pausing and continue in that pause and that stability of awareness and that real interest in humility to study a way of showing up, a way of understanding, a way of responding that contributes in the deepest sense, in the long run sense, to everybody's well-being, and to avoid responding in ways that takes away from our own and others' well-being. And that's really the challenge. And initially it's a bit of a leap of faith that there is a way to relate that contributes to everybody's well-being. And one of the things that makes this developing this way of being in the relational world, harmonizing with the relational world, and more living in ways that contributes to everybody's well-being, the real ticket to doing this is to get to know the non-relational world. So this is often kind of the stereotype of Buddhism, I think wrongly, is that it's more focused on this non-relational emptiness, putting everything down, all these sort of experiences of not self, or talked about in different ways in our early Buddhist tradition. but they're really meant to work together. The understandings that develop in the relational world actually support insight into the non-relational, I'm not sure we even call it world, but the non-relational. And insight into the non-relational really allows us to be more fully, freely in the relational world. They really work together. And if you're going to emphasize one of the two, emphasize the relational world, because it brings a kind of integrity to the insights in the non-relational. Like if they don't make sense, if they don't apply to the relational world, I'd have a lot of questions about my non-relational insights, like seeing that everything's empty of self. If it doesn't make me a better human being, if it doesn't support my relationship with my cat or my partner or my friends, or finding a way to give and receive in the world of relationships, then really what's the point of these insights into the non-relational? So let me talk about this. And I gave an article, it's here in today's resources, but it was there last week too. And it's Gil Fronsdal's wonderful short article, The Relational and the Non-Relational Dimensions of Buddhist Practice by Gil Fronsdal. So you can see that. I just, again, posted the link for those resources in the chat, so you can get that if you want. But first, I just want to mention Dipa Ma. Some of you know Dipa Ma here at Common Ground, both at the Retreat Center and our City Center. We have posted around the building and on the altar a picture of Dipa Ma, one of our contemporary teachers. A lot of our elders here in the Western Insight Meditation or Early Buddhism community had the opportunity to connect with Dipa Ma. She even made it to IMS, Insight Meditation Society, I think possibly twice, but for sure once before she passed away. So an Indian woman who was living in Burma, and after some really significant losses in her life, went to the monastery in Burma and really took to the practice quickly, had very powerful, deep awakening, and unfortunately sort of is one of, in our lineage, one of our elders. And so you could find, there's a wonderful book on Dipa Ma. Let's see, it used to be called Knee Deep in Grace, but then they republished it, and I think it's something, just the life or teachings of Dipa Ma, D-I-P-A and then M-A, because she was the mother of Dipa. Dipa was one of her daughters. So that's it. Talk about an impersonal name, Dipa Ma. But anyway, Joseph once described Dipa Ma, just seeing her bowing down to the altar, as love bowing to love. And when people would get a hug from Dipa Ma, they'd go visit her. Eventually she moved back to India, and that's where a lot of our Western elders met her in the late 60s and 70s, when she was living in Calcutta. And they'd get a hug from Dipa Ma, and it was like this experience of unconditional love and profound emptiness. Like no one was there, but there was this vast, infinite, unconditional love. And maybe if you're fortunate, you've had some experience like that, little glimpses of how that unconditional or universal love, the love that is so deeply healing, where we feel in a funny way so completely seen, so completely held in this relative relational sense, and somehow at the same time there's a profound sense of how impersonal it all is. And it's not obviously easy to put these experiences into words, but maybe in your small group today, if you stay for the small groups, you could chat about this. Or if you're not going to stay for the small groups at 11:45 to 12, then maybe just find your own time to journal or reflect, or to talk with a dear friend about these. You do want to be careful about who you have these kind of conversations with, so the person doesn't dismiss you as being silly or something like that. But it's really important to be interested not just in the more ordinary freedom here in our relational world where we're harmonizing and we feel there's this nice quality of friendliness and the capacity to refrain and just like knowing the difference between what's wholesome and unwholesome and feeling like we have the capacity to kind of live up to the aspiration to be wholesome and to refrain from the tendencies that are embedded in our heart to be unwholesome, right? And we feel like a competent human being. But we want to start integrating in what Gil Fronsdal at least is calling the non-relational, or what in a more traditional Buddhist word we'd use is the unconditioned, right? See, right there, that word, we only know the conditioned. So the word, the unconditioned or the non-relational, is really there's something, but it isn't something we can grasp, because as soon as we grasp, then the mind's in relationship with it. The thinking mind is in relationship with it, and we know that, well, that's not it. So let me read a little bit from Gil's article just to kind of get us started, and then we'll pick this up again next week. So what about this unconditioned, this non-relational? So I'm reading from the middle of Gil's article. While Buddhism puts a great emphasis on developing healthy and wise relationships to the world, it also includes an understanding of the drawbacks of the relational world. And this is the first step to opening to the non-relational, the unconditioned, is just naturally seeing that even when I deeply respect a growing, deepening capacity to be skillful in the relational world, to harmonize, to refrain from what's unwholesome, to cultivate what's wholesome, there's a sense of insecurity or exposure in the relational world. No matter our competence, no matter how many good habits we've developed, we're still always vulnerable. Things change. And that insecurity is a necessary medicine. Seeing in kind of traditional Buddhist language, we say insight into dukkha, insight into the deep, subtle but deep sense of insecurity, vulnerability, unreliability, uncertainty. That's just normal, ordinary. It's just the way it is. Because it doesn't take away from wanting to learn how to harmonize, learning how to refrain from acting out in ways that take away my well-being and your well-being. We still care about that, but we see its limitations. As necessary as that work is in the relational world, the heart deeply, subtly seeks something beyond it, even before it knows what that is. Because we need to be interested in order to see what we're not seeing. And so knowing the limitations of our relational world is a powerful way toward humility. And we need that humility to open. So a little bit later in Gil's article, he writes, to experience the fullest possibility of peace and freedom, we need to put to rest all our preoccupations and concerns, at least temporarily. Our mind does not need to be constantly relating to something. It is possible to still the activity of the mind and so experience a peace that is a radical alternative to how the mind usually operates. For this purpose, Buddhism points to the non-relational dimension of consciousness. So in a meditative space, initially we are in that relational world. We're relating to the thoughts, we're relating to the sensations in the body, we're relating to whatever's reverberating from earlier in the day in our heart, right? And we're cultivating skillful ways of relating and refraining from getting tight with what's moving. And with that harmonizing and the calming, the mind can begin to sense something that's here and now, but not the relational world. And it's sort of a letting go and a letting be of the relational world. It's a, the way we often talk about it, it's a non-grasping, a non-dependence, a non-reactivity to the relational world. And remember, the relational world is everything we know, right? It's all of this. It's the thoughts, it's the emotions, it's the sensations, it's the sounds, it's the sight. It's all the conditions and the mind relating to conditions. Internal conditions, external conditions, subtle conditions, gross conditions. That's the relational world. And we need to develop confidence. This teaching on the non-relational depends on a healthy relationship to the relational. We need to have a healthy relationship to conditions, a wholesome way of being, harmonizing with the conditions of the moment, in order to intuit and develop this capacity to put everything down, to let go, to let be. In a way, it's just sort of falling back into nothingness or falling back into emptiness. But it's right here. It's always here. We're not going, no one's going anywhere. It's just dropping the burden of feeling obliged to be skillful. But we do that best when there's a lot of skillfulness, like the mind is steady, it's peaceful, it's relating with non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion to the different experiences that are coming and going. We call that a good sit, right? Peaceful, relatively still, heart's open, tender, but not reactive. And then in that space of having a good sit and appreciating the calm, right? It's just intuiting the possibility of, I think it was Gil Fonsdale once mentioned to me just in a practice meeting, just this point of discerning a kind of spiritual gravitational pull. It's like we're in the world of gravity all the time, but we don't really notice gravity. I mean, we're affected by it all the time, right? But we could, right now even, if we wanted to, we could sense the pull of gravity. And there's a similar kind of spiritual intuition to putting it all down. And this kind of can lead, support deepening of insight into what we call the unconditioned, the non-relational. And before we end, I just want to read a little bit more from Gil's article. The non-relational dimension of the mind, is found through a not doing, and so involves letting go of our efforts to do, accomplish, avoid, and change what's happening. Right? A hands off. And he continues writing, more often this is a gradual process of calming down and quieting the mind. As the mind becomes more still, a point is reached when the meditator realizes that wanting further deepening of peace, a further deepening of the peace, is the very thing that stands in the way of peace. At some point, even letting go can be too much. Letting things be becomes the only possibility. And sometimes when I'm instructing people, I'll say, instead of letting things be, is just sensing the possibility of trust. And even the ordinary word of relax. Because it's really in these places, in these meditative places where there is a lot of peace and a lot of energy, a lot of brightness, and even a kind of intuition of possibility, like the heart, the spiritual heart, senses the proximity of opening to something it hasn't opened to before, right? So that really brightens the heart and mind. But even then, there a little spiritual greed can creep in, like, oh, I don't want to blow this opportunity. I want to do this right. I really want to see what is there to see. But like Gil is pointing to, that can get in the way. So it's at some point, the gateway, the opening to what we call the unconditioned, as one teacher once said, is an accident waiting to happen. So we can make ourselves accident prone. But the ego, in a sense, what we think of as the ego, what we think of as the practitioner, they can't do it. And any sense of me doing it, the practitioner doing it, the wise meditator doing it, ends up in the end to get in the way. Even though it was very useful for a long time, being the good meditator, doing what the meditator should do, at some point, something like letting be or trust or relax and allow. Allow the gravitational pull to do what the gravitational pull does. And I'll just read a few more sentences here. Gil writes, as we calm down, it is possible to sense a way of being in this world which is non-relational. That is, our minds are not operating with any concerns or relationships to anything. With this comes a deepening sense of well-being. As our mind becomes less preoccupied with the relational world, deeper wellsprings of loving kindness, empathy, and insight can arise. Our relationships tend to become healthier, simpler, and more straightforward. And this is what I meant. The only actual way to sense the deepening of insight into the unconditioned is how it continues on in terms of how we're relating in the relational world. That's how we know the deepening is happening. It just gets lighter. The heart is more nimble and creative and tender, compassionate, functional in the relational world. Precisely because the heart feels less burdened by the relational world. Because of the insight into the unconditioned, the relational world is much more workable. It's still totally messy and imperfect, including our own tendencies, but they're all workable because of these insights into the non-relational. I'll read just one or two more sentences here. As the mind becomes simpler, more peaceful, and less caught up in things, a time comes when all the intentional and relational activity of the mind comes to a stop. Awareness can exist without it being brought into the service of the mind's desires and aversions. It just is. This non-relational way of being defines or defies exact definition. It's impossible to cling to this state or to claim it as one's own, because to do so is to leave the non-relational state and return to being in relationship to something. It is a little like grabbing an open hand with the hand itself. The open hand disappears as soon as the hand closes around itself. We can know that we are experiencing the mind that is not relating to anything, but we can't touch it with thought, description, or any form of self-appropriation. So hopefully that makes us interested. And just deepening our competence in the relational world, learning from karma, from cause and effect, sensing this power of restraint, the kind of power of conscience to allow us to have an honest relationship with our unwholesome impulses, but to not have to act them out in ways that take away from our well-being or the well-being of others. And then because of that greater competence and capacity to harmonize, we'll have more calm, including in our meditations. And in these more quiet times in our life, more steady, more still qualities, then we can sense this subtle trusting, this subtle gravitational pull for the heart to let go of its entanglements with sense experience. It's not a aversion to the world of sense experience, but it's also not a trying to get anything from anything. It's really, like Gil says earlier, a non-doing. And it's mostly about being in a really quiet, steady, bright, clear space, and humble. Because the habit when we're in a really nice meditative space is to think, without noticing that we're thinking it, this is a really good place for me. I really like this place. It's so peaceful. So we're identified with the peace. sometimes can access in our meditation. We want to replace that habit with a more humble, open, curious. Like, what is this? But that curiosity not framed, like, we're not interested in what we've already seen. The mind is interested in what it doesn't know, which means it can't be gripping to what it thinks. So that's why I sometimes use that relaxation, or we use the word trusting or letting be, or that simile that Gil mentioned about sensing a very subtle but real gravitational pull. Because that leads the way. Then the heart will find its own way. So I'll leave it here today. And I see that Shannon is here. Shannon, are you going to do the small groups today?
I think so, yes.
Oh, great. Before I pass it on to Shannon, I'll just mention that Shelley Graff will be leading a day-long retreat on February 26th. And then there will be a half day and a day long in the next month as well. And we're about to send out practice periods at the retreat center, one in March, and then all of the month of April. Including the last part of April, we'll have our community practice intensive, both for our Zoom community and the city community in Minneapolis, as well as people coming out to the retreat center for periods of time. So please join in. Get on the weekly email list if you want to see the information about that, or just take some time to look through the public calendar that's online. Those two places, the weekly email and our online calendar, are really the main way we communicate.